Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a battlefield or a royal court, but to a place of quiet contemplation and gentle clinking sounds, the very first coffee houses of the Ottoman Empire. Imagine yourself, if you will, trudging through the dusty, cobbled streets of Constantinople in the early 16th century. The air is thick with the scent of spices, perhaps a hint of rosewater, and a pervasive, rich aroma that's both earthy and sweet, a smell you don't quite recognize. You follow your nose, drawn by a soft murmur of voices and the distant strumming of a lute. You turn a corner, and there it is, a doorway shrouded in dim lamplight, emitting a warmth that beckons you in. Inside, men are seated on low cushions, conversing in hushed tones, sipping from tiny cups, a delicate steam curling upwards. You probably won't survive the plagues, the political intrigue, or the sheer lack of modern plumbing, but for now, you can experience the quiet revolution of coffee. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fun to imagine this sleepy little community spanning the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside, feeling the cool, smooth stone beneath your bare feet. The glow of oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, revealing intricate geometric patterns. The murmur of conversation is a soothing balm, never rising above a gentle hum. You find a spot, settle onto a plush cushion, and a server, moving with unhurried grace, approaches. He doesn't speak, but his gesture invites your order. You nod, curious about the dark, fragrant liquid that everyone seems to be savoring. This, you discover, is Kav coffee. Before it became the daily ritual for billions, before the flat whites and the espressos, before the giant chains with their bewildering array of syrups, coffee was a profound mystery, a whispered secret that traveled continents. Historians still argue whether the first Ottoman coffee houses were purely for pleasure or if they held deeper, more subversive intellectual gatherings. What we do know is that this warm, dark elixir wasn't just a drink, it was an experience, a social lubricant, and, perhaps, the subtle spark for intellectual discourse in a world that wasn't always keen on new ideas. You watch as men play backgammon, their movements slow and deliberate, or simply gaze into the middle distance, lost in thought. No one is rushing. The air is heavy with contemplation, the kind that only a good, strong brew can induce. It's a truly peculiar thing, this drink, and you can already feel its subtle effects, a gentle wakefulness that belies the hour. It's a bit like finding out that the greatest scientific breakthroughs of our time started with a particularly strong cup of Earl Grey. And for a world accustomed to water, wine, or milk, this dark, bitter concoction was nothing short of revolutionary. But before coffee could arrive in Constantinople, it had to begin somewhere. And that somewhere, as the legend goes, was the rugged, green highlands of Ethiopia, perhaps as early as the 9th century. You're transported now to a sun-drenched mountainside, where a young goat herder named Kaldi is tending his flock. The day is long, the sun is warm on your face, and the goats, well, they're just doing goat things. Munching, bleating, generally causing delightful chaos. But then, Kaldi notices something peculiar. His goats, usually so placid after a long day of grazing, are suddenly full of an inexplicable vigor. They're jumping, prancing, almost dancing around a particular shrub with bright red berries. You lean closer, observing these energetic goats with a quiet amusement. It's almost as if they've had too much sugar before bedtime, which, if you're a parent, you know is a terrifying prospect. Kaldi, a curious sort, decides to try the berries himself. He plucks a few, pops them into his mouth, and nothing immediately dramatic happens. But then, a subtle alertness creeps over him. He feels less tired, more focused. It's not a jolt, like you might get from a modern energy drink, but a gentle, sustained clarity. This, so the story goes, was the very first human experience with coffee. Historians still argue whether Kaldi was a real person or a symbolic figure representing the discovery, but the narrative has certainly endured. You can almost feel the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the coffee plant, hear the faint bleating of the goats in the distance. It's a peaceful, unassuming beginning for a drink that would eventually fuel revolutions, inspire art, and become a cornerstone of global commerce. Kaldi, intrigued by his newfound energy, shares his discovery with a local monastery. Imagine the scene. A humble goat herder, probably smelling faintly of goat, presenting these magical berries to solemn, sleep-deprived monks. The monks, initially skeptical, dismiss the berries. One even throws them into a fire, declaring them to be the work of the devil. You might chuckle softly at the irony, considering how many monks would later rely on coffee to stay awake for their long hours of prayer and study. But then, a wonderful aroma begins to waft from the fire. The roasted berries release a captivating fragrance, unlike anything they've ever smelled. The monks, now intrigued by the heavenly scent, rake the beans from the embers, grind them up, and dissolve them in hot water to preserve the aroma. They drink the bitter, dark liquid, and lo and behold, they find themselves able to stay awake for longer periods during their nightly vigils. This, for them, was a miracle, a divine gift to aid their spiritual journey. It's a peculiar tidbit, isn't it? The supposed devil's fruit becoming a tool for piety. You can almost see the weary monks, eyes wide with newfound wakefulness, murmuring their prayers with renewed vigor. It reminds you a bit of how your own cup of coffee helps you tackle that mountain of laundry you've been avoiding. This accidental roasting, this serendipitous scent, transformed the perception of the berry. From a mere stimulant, it became a potential sacred aid. The monks, now convinced of its benevolent power, began to regularly consume the brew, passing on the secret to others. This gentle narrative of discovery, bathed in the soft glow of a monastery, set the stage for coffee's incredible journey. It wasn't about mass production or quick profits. It was about a quiet, personal revelation. From the Ethiopian highlands, coffee's next quiet chapter unfolds among the Sufi mystics of Yemen. You find yourself now in a secluded Sufi lodge, the air thick with the scent of incense and quiet contemplation. It's centuries after Chaldee's discovery, probably around the 13th or 14th century, and the coffee plant has slowly, almost secretly, made its way across the Red Sea. Here, amongst these devout spiritualists, coffee wasn't about a morning jolt. It was a tool, a gentle aid to deeper spiritual practices. The Sufis, known for their meditative rituals and long hours of prayer, found in coffee a way to achieve a heightened state of awareness, to remain vigilant during their dhikr, the repetitive chanting of God's names. Imagine yourself sitting cross-legged on a worn rug, surrounded by robed figures swaying gently, their voices a soft, rhythmic hum. A small, steaming cup is placed before you. The taste is bitter, yes, but there's an underlying complexity, an earthiness that seems to anchor you to the present moment. You feel a subtle opening of your mind, a quiet clarity that helps you focus on the spiritual task at hand. It's a far cry from the hurried gulp of your modern-day commute coffee. This is coffee as sacrament, consumed with intention and reverence. Historians still argue whether Sufi communities actively cultivated coffee in Yemen or simply brought seeds from Ethiopia, but their role in its early spread is undeniable. The Sufi mystics, particularly those in the city of Mocha, yes, that Mocha, the very name now synonymous with chocolatey coffee drinks, became quiet evangelists for the brew. They weren't setting up bustling cafes. Instead, they incorporated coffee into their communal rituals. It allowed them to extend their prayer sessions late into the night, to engage in deep philosophical discussions without the drag of fatigue. It was, in essence, their ancient energy drink, but one imbued with a spiritual purpose. You might notice the gentle humor in this. The very same drink that fuels our rush through the workday once fueled serene, slow-paced spiritual journeys. One quirky tidbit suggests that a specific Sufi sheikh, named Ali ibn Omar al-Shadhili, was instrumental in popularizing coffee among his followers. He was said to have encountered coffee while traveling through Ethiopia and brought it back to Yemen, recognizing its unique properties. It wasn't about the flavor initially, it was about the effect. It allowed the mind to remain sharp, the body to stay still, and the spirit to ascend. You can almost hear the soft, steady breathing of the mystics, punctuated by the occasional sip of the dark, invigorating liquid. This was coffee's incubation period, a time when its true potential, beyond simply waking you up, was quietly understood and refined. It was the precursor to its social revolution, a gentle awakening that began not in a bustling marketplace, but in the tranquil solitude of spiritual devotion. It's a lovely thought, isn't it? That your morning brew has roots in such profound and peaceful origins. It's a testament to how something so simple can hold such deep and varied meanings across cultures and centuries. With its spiritual benefits firmly established among the Sufis, coffee began its slow, deliberate journey outwards. You're now on a dhow, a traditional sailing vessel, gently rocking on the waters of the Red Sea, probably in the 15th century. The air is warm and humid, carrying the scent of salt and distant lands. The cargo isn't spices or silks this time, but something far more potent, though still largely unknown: coffee beans. From Yemen, this dark secret began to spread, first to the holy city of Mecca, then further north to Cairo. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, almost imperceptible seep, carried by pilgrims, merchants, and scholars. Imagine the bustling caravanserai of Mecca, a vibrant crossroads where pilgrims from all corners of the Islamic world converge. You see them, weary from their long journeys, seeking sustenance and rest. And amongst the dates and the dried fruits, a new offering begins to appear, a small cup of dark, aromatic liquid. The initial reaction might have been curiosity, then a quiet appreciation for its restorative qualities. It helped them stay awake for prayers, to endure the rigors of pilgrimage, and to engage in conversations that spanned continents. This is where coffee began to transcend its purely spiritual role and enter the wider sphere of social interaction. Historians still argue whether the first public consumption of coffee outside Sufi circles happened in Mecca or Cairo, but its diffusion through these major pilgrimage and trade hubs was undoubtedly crucial. One quirky tidbit about this early spread is the role of smuggling. The Yemenis, understanding the value of their unique crop, initially tried to keep the cultivation of coffee beans a closely guarded secret, even boiling the beans before export to prevent others from growing them. But, as with all good secrets, especially delicious ones, they rarely stay contained. A few fertile beans, perhaps hidden in a traveler's garment or a merchant's pack, made their way out, quietly propagating in new lands. You can almost picture a sly merchant, a glint in his eye, slipping a handful of unboiled beans into his turban. It's a bit like trying to keep a secret recipe when everyone can smell how good it is. The journey to Mecca was significant because it brought coffee into contact with a diverse array of people, exposing it to cultures that would eventually carry it even further afield. It became a beverage of hospitality, a sign of welcome, offered to visitors in homes and humble stalls. You watch as a group of travelers huddle around a small fire, sharing stories and sips of the dark brew, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The effect is subtle, a gentle clarity, a quiet warmth spreading through you. It's not about immediate exhilaration, but about sustaining conversation, fostering connection, and simply being. This slow, almost organic spread, fueled by human interaction and shared experiences, was the unheralded precursor to coffee's global domination. From Mecca, coffee's journey continued north, arriving in Cairo, a city that was, even then, a bustling hub of intellectual and commercial activity. You find yourself now amidst the vibrant chaos of medieval Cairo, probably in the late 15th or early 16th century. The narrow streets are thronged with merchants, scholars, and everyday folk, the air filled with the cries of vendors and the distant braying of donkeys. This is where coffee truly began its public life, transitioning from the quiet contemplation of Sufi lodges to the lively chatter of dedicated establishments. The very first coffee houses, or kavahanes, in Cairo were modest affairs, often little more than a few benches set around a brazier where coffee was brewed. But their appeal was immediate and undeniable. Imagine stepping out of the noisy street into one of these nascent coffee houses. The dim light, the soft murmur of voices, the rich, intoxicating aroma. It was a sanctuary, a place where people could escape the clamor of the city and engage in quiet conversation. You see scholars debating philosophy, merchants discussing trade, and ordinary citizens exchanging gossip. It was a democratic space, unlike the exclusive salons or private homes. Historians still argue whether the kavahanes in Cairo were the absolute first public coffee houses in the world, but they certainly set the precedent for what was to come. One quirky tidbit is that initially, Many religious scholars viewed coffee with suspicion, even deeming it haram, forbidden, because of its stimulating effects. They worried it was intoxicating, similar to alcohol, and thus against Islamic law. You might find a gentle amusement in this, as the very drink now used by millions to stay awake for early morning prayers was once thought to be a path to sin. Debates raged in the mosques and legal courts, with scholars on both sides presenting their arguments. It was a fascinating, early example of a public health and moral panic, centuries before terms like addiction were even coined. Despite the controversies, the Kavahanes thrived. They became centers of social life, places where stories were exchanged, poems were recited, and news spread faster than a desert wind. You observe the quiet artistry of the coffee maker, his movements precise as he grinds the beans and prepares the brew over a charcoal fire. The ritual of preparation was as much a part of the experience as the drink itself. The slow bubbling of the seive, the delicate pouring into tiny cups. It was a performance designed to soothe and captivate. It's a bit like watching a master chef at work, but for your morning pick-me-up. This burgeoning coffee culture in Cairo was a crucial stepping stone. It proved that coffee wasn't just a spiritual aid or a personal indulgence. It was a communal beverage, a catalyst for social interaction and intellectual exchange. The seeds of the modern cafe were sown here, in these humble Cairene establishments, paving the way for coffee's grand entrance onto the world stage. You feel the gentle hum of activity around you, a sense of quiet contentment settling in as you take another sip of the dark, invigorating liquid. The stage is set, the audience is waiting, and now, coffee, the silent protagonist of our story, makes its grand entrance into the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople, the magnificent capital. You're now transported to the mid-16th century, a time of immense wealth, power, and cultural flourishing under the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Imagine the sheer scale of the city, towering mosques, bustling bazaars, the glittering Topkapi Palace, and a constant ebb and flow of humanity from every corner of the known world. How did coffee arrive in this grand metropolis? The most widely accepted account, and a rather delightful one, involves a gentleman named Özdemir Pasha, the Ottoman governor of Yemen. He's said to have discovered coffee's invigorating properties during his time there, and, captivated by its unique charm, brought it to the attention of Sultan Suleiman himself. Imagine the scene. A high-ranking official, returning from a distant province, not with gold or jewels, but with a humble sack of dark, aromatic beans and a story of a magical, stimulating brew. You can almost see the raised eyebrows in the imperial court. Historians still argue whether Özdemir Pasha was the sole introducer or if coffee arrived through other trade routes and individual merchants, but his role certainly cemented its imperial connection. The initial introduction to the Sultan's court would have been a private affair, a demonstration of this curious new drink. You can picture the royal coffee makers, their movements precise and practiced, carefully grinding the beans and brewing the first imperial cup. The Sultan, a man of refined tastes, would have sampled it cautiously, perhaps a flicker of surprise crossing his face as the gentle alertness began to take hold. It's a far cry from the modern-day office worker needing a quadruple espresso just to face Monday morning. One quirky tidbit about this introduction is the story of the Kavasi Beysi, or the chief coffee maker to the Sultan. This wasn't just any servant. It was a highly respected and influential position within the palace. The Kavasi Beysi was responsible for preparing the Sultan's coffee, ensuring its perfection, and often acting as a trusted confidant. You might find gentle humor in thinking that the person responsible for your daily caffeine fix could once have held such political sway. It's a bit like imagining your favorite barista advising the president on foreign policy. The arrival of coffee in the Ottoman court was a significant moment. It legitimized the drink, elevating its status from a mere common beverage to something fit for royalty. This imperial endorsement paved the way for its wider acceptance and popularity among the general populace. You can almost feel the gentle hum of anticipation, the quiet excitement, as news of this new, stimulating drink begins to spread through the palace and out into the city. Constantinople, ever a magnet for novelty and luxury, was ready for its coffee revolution. The stage is set for the transformation of private indulgence into public passion. With imperial approval, or at least a curious acceptance, coffee was now ready to truly take root in Constantinople. You're now back on the bustling streets of the capital, probably around 1555, and the city is abuzz with a new kind of establishment. Two Syrian merchants, Hakem of Aleppo and Shams of Damascus, are credited with opening Constantinople's very first public coffee houses. Imagine the scene. Grander than the humble stalls of Cairo, these were purpose-built spaces designed for comfort and conversation. You approach one of these pioneering kavahanes. Unlike the usual noisy taverns or the private confines of homes, this place exudes a different kind of energy. The air is still fragrant with coffee, but now mingled with the scent of tobacco from long pipes, or chabuks, that some patrons are leisurely smoking. The decor is inviting. Low tables, soft cushions, and perhaps even a gentle fountain gurgling in a central courtyard. It's a bit like discovering the very first comfortable armchair after a lifetime of hard wooden stools. Historians still argue whether these were the absolute first public coffee houses or if earlier, less formal places existed, but Hakem and Shams certainly popularized them on a grand scale. You settle onto a cushion, taking in the scene. The room is filled with a diverse crowd, scholars with their scrolls, poets composing verses, merchants striking deals, and ordinary citizens simply whiling away the hours. It's a truly democratic space, transcending social classes in a way few other public venues did. Everyone, from the lowliest laborer to the most esteemed intellectual, could find a place here, as long as they could afford a cup of coffee. This was a radical concept in a society often defined by rigid hierarchies. One quirky tidbit: these early coffee houses sometimes employed storytellers, known as meta, who would entertain patrons with epic tales and humorous anecdotes, making the coffee house not just a place for drinks, but for performance and cultural exchange. You might even catch a glimpse of one, gesturing dramatically, his voice a mesmerizing drone that could lull you into a pleasant trance. The atmosphere is one of serene activity. There's no shouting, no raucous laughter, just the gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of tiny porcelain cups, and the occasional soft clatter of backgammon pieces. It's a place for reflection, for connection, and for the quiet exchange of ideas. The coffee itself is served in small, handleless cups, thick and strong, designed to be savored slowly. You take a sip, feeling the warmth spread through you, a subtle energy awakening your senses without overwhelming them. It's not just a drink. It's an invitation to pause, to breathe, to simply be. These initial coffee houses quickly became immensely popular, sparking a social revolution across the Ottoman Empire. They provided a much-needed public sphere for socializing and discussing everything from politics to poetry. And as you lean back on your cushion, feeling the gentle buzz of the coffee and the soothing ambience of the room, you realize that you're sitting in the very cradle of a global phenomenon. The meteoric rise of coffee houses in Constantinople, however, didn't go unnoticed by the authorities. You're now stepping into a period of cautious scrutiny, where the very act of sipping coffee became entangled with state control and religious interpretations. Imagine the Ottoman sultans, initially curious, now observing these burgeoning kavahanes with a mixture of fascination and growing unease. These places, while seemingly benign, were hotbeds of conversation, often a little too lively for imperial comfort. News, gossip, and even political dissent could spread like wildfire over a shared cup of coffee. Sultans like Murad III and Murad IV, in particular, viewed these establishments with suspicion. They worried about idleness, about citizens neglecting their duties, and, most pressingly, about seditious talk. There was even a prevailing fear that the stimulating effects of coffee could lead to moral degradation or, worse, rebellion. You might find a gentle chuckle in this. It's a bit like imagining a modern government trying to ban social media because people are discussing too much politics. Historians still argue whether the bans were primarily driven by moralistic concerns or purely political anxieties about uncontrolled public assembly. The bans, when they came, were often severe. Coffee houses were sometimes closed, their patrons dispersed, and in extreme cases, the kavasi, coffee house owners, faced harsh penalties. Imagine the sudden silence descending upon a once bustling cavahane, the lingering aroma of coffee in the air, but no voices, no laughter. It was a peculiar cat-and-mouse game between the state and the caffeine-loving populace. One quirky tidbit suggests that during one of these bans, people resorted to drinking coffee at home, often hidden in their basements or private gardens, transforming it into a secret indulgence, almost like a forbidden pleasure. This underground coffee culture merely fueled its allure, making it even more desirable. Despite the crackdowns, coffee's popularity was too deeply ingrained to be truly suppressed. The demand was simply too high. After periods of prohibition, the bans would often be relaxed or lifted entirely, perhaps due to the sheer impossibility of enforcement, or perhaps because the authorities realized the economic benefits of taxing the booming coffee trade. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the citizens as their beloved cavahanes reopened, the gentle hum of conversation slowly returning. It's a testament to the resilience of human habits, especially when those habits involve a comforting, stimulating beverage. This dance between prohibition and acceptance highlights coffee's journey from a humble discovery to a powerful social force. It was more than just a drink. It was a symbol of freedom, of conversation, and of a shared public life. And as you consider these periods of unexpected bans, you gain a deeper appreciation for the simple act of enjoying your own cup of coffee, free from any imperial decree. Beyond the grand pronouncements of sultans and the hushed whispers of dissent, lay the heart of the coffee experience, its meticulous preparation. You're now invited to observe the quiet artistry of an Ottoman coffee maker, perhaps in a modest kitchen or a corner of a bustling cavahane. This wasn't about speed or automation. It was a slow, almost meditative ritual designed to extract the very essence of the bean. First, the beans. They weren't pre-ground or stored in vacuum-sealed bags. Instead, green coffee beans were roasted fresh, often over a charcoal brazier, until they achieved a perfect, even dark brown. You can almost hear the soft crackling of the beans, smell the rich, evolving aroma as they transform from earthy to deeply fragrant. This stage required keen eyes and a discerning nose, as over-roasting would burn them, and under-roasting would leave them flavorless. It's a bit like trying to perfectly toast a marshmallow over a campfire, a delicate balance. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans consistently preferred a very dark roast, or if regional preferences varied, but freshness was key. Once roasted, the beans were cooled, then ground immediately before brewing. And here's where the peculiar detail comes in. They weren't ground in a whirring electric grinder. Instead, they were pounded, almost to a fine powder, in a large, heavy mortar and pestle, often made of brass or copper. You can imagine the rhythmic thump-thump-thump as the coffee maker expertly pulverizes the beans. This painstaking method ensured a consistent, ultra-fine grind, crucial for the unique brewing technique that followed. One quirky tidbit: some very old mortars even have small grooves worn into them from centuries of this precise, repetitive motion, a subtle testament to the enduring tradition. Then came the brewing vessel, the sezv, a small, long-handled pot, usually made of copper or brass, with a wide bottom and a narrow neck. Water, ideally soft, was brought to a gentle boil, and then the finely ground coffee was added. Sugar was often added at this stage, too, varying the sweetness from sod plain, unsweetened, to orta medium sweet, to saksa curly very sweet. You watch as the coffee maker stirs the mixture slowly, allowing it to heat gently, never letting it boil too vigorously. The magic happens as the coffee begins to foam, a rich, dark crema rising to the surface. The coffee maker carefully removes the sezv from the heat just as the foam threatens to overflow, allows it to settle, then returns it to the heat. This process might be repeated several times, meticulously building that perfect, frothy top. This foam, known as kopuk, was highly prized, a mark of a well-prepared cup. Finally, the coffee is poured slowly into tiny, handleless cups known as fincan, often placed in ornamental metal holders called zarf. You can feel the warmth of the fincan in your hands, the inviting aroma rising to meet you. This meticulous, unhurried process is a stark contrast to our modern, rushed coffee rituals. It wasn't just about getting a caffeine fix, it was about respect for the bean, for the craft, and for the slow enjoyment of the moment. And as you take your first sip of this historically authentic brew, you realize that patience truly is a virtue, especially when it comes to a perfect cup of coffee. With its refined preparation and burgeoning popularity, coffee swiftly wove itself into the intricate fabric of Ottoman daily life. You're now observing the pervasive influence of kava across all strata of society, from the grandest palaces to the humblest workshops. It wasn't just a drink, it was a cultural phenomenon, a social lubricant, and even, at times, a quiet rebellion. In the morning, before the heat of the day truly set in, a small cup of coffee would be offered to guests as a sign of hospitality in virtually every home. Imagine visiting a friend's house. You'd be ushered in, offered a seat on soft cushions, and almost immediately, a small fincan of freshly brewed coffee would appear, accompanied by a piece of sweet lokum, Turkish delight. It was an unspoken ritual of welcome, a gentle invitation to relax and converse. This act of offering coffee became deeply ingrained in etiquette, an essential part of Ottoman social graces. Historians still argue whether this domestic consumption preceded or followed the rise of public coffee houses, but both certainly flourished in tandem. But coffee's influence extended far beyond the domestic sphere. In the bazaars, weary merchants would take breaks to sip coffee, revitalizing themselves for another round of bartering. In the workshops of artisans, the rhythmic clinking of tools would be punctuated by the quiet slurping of coffee, keeping hands steady and minds sharp. You might even find a gentle humor in thinking that the intricate patterns on a Turkish rug might have been conceived over a strong cup of coffee. It's a bit like imagining Silicon Valley tech giants fueled by artisanal pour-overs, but with a much older, richer history. The kavahanes, as we've seen, became democratic spaces. Here, the strict social hierarchies that governed much of Ottoman life softened. Scholars, poets, soldiers, and merchants would sit side by side, sharing cups of coffee and engaging in lively discussions, or simply enjoying the company and quiet ambience. These were places of news exchange, of gossip, of storytelling, and even of political debate, often under the watchful but sometimes weary eye of the authorities. One quirky tidbit: some coffee houses even specialized in certain forms of entertainment, from shadow puppet plays, karagaz and hasavat, to chess matches, making them vibrant cultural hubs. You can almost hear the soft clack of chess pieces, interspersed with murmurs of concentration. Coffee also played a subtle role in formal occasions. Before important business dealings, contracts, or even marriage proposals, coffee would be served. The way a person drank their coffee, or even the subtle nuances of its preparation, could convey unspoken messages. It was a moment of pause, a chance to gauge a person's demeanor, to build a subtle rapport before moving on to serious matters. The pervasive aroma of coffee, the constant gentle hum of coffee-related activities, grinding, brewing, sipping, became an inseparable part of the Ottoman soundscape and olfactory landscape. It was a comforting presence, a familiar ritual that anchored the day, providing moments of quiet reflection or spirited connection. And as you imagine this rich tapestry of daily life, woven with threads of coffee, you realize just how deeply this simple bean permeated an entire civilization. While the kavahanes of the Ottoman Empire offered a relatively democratic space, the social norms of the era still dictated distinct experiences based on gender. You're now considering the fascinating, and sometimes frustrating, realities of women's relationship with coffee during this period. Imagine the vibrant, male-dominated atmosphere of a public coffee house, the easy camaraderie, the intellectual discussions. For women, direct access to these spaces was largely, though not entirely, restricted. This doesn't mean women didn't enjoy coffee. Far from it. Coffee culture for women largely flourished in the private sphere, within their homes, in the opulent harems of the wealthy, and in special women-only gatherings. You can imagine the gentle clinking of fincans in a beautifully decorated women's salon, the air filled with laughter and intimate conversations. These were spaces of female solidarity and social connection, where stories were shared, advice was given, and friendships blossomed over cups of aromatic coffee. Historians still argue whether women had secret, informal coffee gatherings in public spaces, perhaps disguised as visits to bathhouses, or if their coffee consumption was almost exclusively private. One quirky tidbit: wealthy Ottoman women often had dedicated coffee maids, or kavasi kariyeler, whose sole responsibility was to prepare and serve coffee with exquisite grace and ceremony. These highly skilled women were trained in the art of coffee making, ensuring each cup was a masterpiece of flavor and foam. You might find a gentle humor in this, picturing a servant whose entire job revolved around perfecting your morning brew, making your own quick pour-over seem rather pedestrian. It's a bit like having a personal barista on call 24/7. For women in harems, coffee played a significant role in their daily routines. It was a moment of quiet indulgence, a break from the intricate social dynamics of the palace. They would gather, sip coffee, share stories, and perhaps even discuss political intrigues, though always discreetly. This private coffee culture allowed women to build social networks and exert subtle influence within their spheres. The public kavahanes, while not open to women, were still indirectly influenced by female preferences. The demand for various blends and preparations, often originating from domestic consumption, would naturally feed into the coffee market. And while you might lament the lack of public access for women, it's important to remember that they created their own vibrant, albeit private, coffee culture, one that was perhaps even more intimate and personal than the public spaces. As you reflect on these distinct gendered experiences, you gain a deeper appreciation for the multifaceted role coffee played in Ottoman society. It was a beverage that adapted to social norms, finding its place in both bustling public arenas and quiet, private sanctuaries, always providing that gentle stimulation and fostering connection. The Ottoman Empire had kept coffee largely to itself for centuries, a cherished secret. But secrets, especially delicious ones, have a way of escaping. You're now witnessing the quiet, unstoppable spread of coffee beyond the Ottoman borders, a phenomenon that would eventually transform it into a truly global beverage. This gentle diffusion began primarily through trade routes and the ever-curious minds of European travelers. Imagine European merchants and diplomats visiting Constantinople, enchanted by the exotic rituals of the kavahanes. They would have sampled the dark, invigorating brew, felt its subtle effects, and undoubtedly yearned to bring this wondrous discovery back to their own lands. The first coffee beans to arrive in Europe were likely smuggled, much like they were out of Yemen, a quiet act of defiance against Ottoman attempts to maintain a monopoly. One quirky tidbit involves a 17th century Indian Sufi saint named Baba Budin, who is said to have successfully smuggled 7 coffee beans from Yemen to India by strapping them to his chest. These few beans became the foundation for India's burgeoning coffee industry, a quiet testament to the power of a single, determined individual. The Venetians, with their extensive trade networks, were among the first Europeans to embrace coffee, bringing it from the Middle East to Italy in the early 17th century. From Venice, it slowly spread north and west. Parisian cafes, Viennese coffee houses, and London's famous penny universities all owe their existence to those initial, daring introductions. You can almost picture the bewilderment on the faces of early Europeans as they encountered this dark, bitter drink for the first time, accustomed as they were to ale or wine. It was a sensory shock, perhaps, but one that quickly turned into fascination. Historians still argue whether the first public coffee houses in Europe appeared in Venice or Oxford, but the impact was undoubtedly profound. The initial European reception was varied. Some embraced it immediately, recognizing its stimulating properties and its potential as a social lubricant. Others, particularly religious leaders, viewed it with suspicion, much like some Ottoman scholars had. They even called it Satan's bitter invention. But, like the earlier bans in the Ottoman Empire, these religious condemnations proved ineffective against the tide of public desire. Pope Clement VIII, upon tasting it, famously declared it so delicious that it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it, reportedly baptizing it to make it acceptable for Christians. You might find a gentle humor in the idea of a pope giving coffee his divine blessing. As coffee gained popularity in Europe, cultivation expanded. The Dutch, through their colonial ventures, managed to obtain coffee plants and began growing them in their colonies, particularly in Java, effectively breaking the Arab monopoly. This led to a dramatic increase in coffee production and a significant drop in its price, making it accessible to a much wider audience. You can sense the quiet momentum building, the subtle shift in global trade as this once secret bean began its journey to every corner of the earth. The world was slowly but surely waking up, one cup of coffee at a time. As coffee made its triumphant march across the globe, it wasn't without its rivals. You're now shifting your focus to the quiet competition coffee faced from other popular beverages that were simultaneously making their way into European and global markets: tea and chocolate. Imagine the burgeoning taste for exotic imports in the 17th and 18th centuries, and how these three giants of the beverage world jostled for supremacy. Tea, primarily from China and later India, arrived in Europe around the same time as coffee. It was initially an expensive luxury, embraced by the aristocracy, and later, thanks to clever marketing and increasing supply, by the middle classes. Think of the elaborate tea ceremonies of the British, or the delicate porcelain teacups that became symbols of refinement. While coffee offered a stimulating, somewhat robust experience, tea presented a more subtle, often more ritualistic, alternative. One quirky tidbit: the initial European instructions for brewing tea were often comically wrong, sometimes suggesting boiling the leaves for hours or even eating them as a vegetable. You can almost hear the gentle humor in imagining someone trying to make a savory tea salad. Historians still argue whether tea's initial popularity in Europe eclipsed coffee's, or if they developed distinct but equally fervent followings. Then there was chocolate. Originally a bitter, ceremonial drink consumed by Mesoamerican civilizations like the Aztecs and Mayans, it was introduced to Europe by the Spanish conquistadors. Unlike coffee and tea, chocolate was initially consumed as a thick, often spiced, beverage reserved for the wealthy elite. It was seen as a luxurious, almost medicinal, drink, far more indulgent than the stimulating qualities of coffee. Imagine sipping a rich, frothy cup of chocolate, perhaps with a hint of chili or cinnamon, a truly decadent experience. While coffee houses bustled with conversation, chocolate houses often catered to a more exclusive, refined clientele, offering a different kind of social indulgence. The interesting dynamic between these three beverages lies in their distinct characteristics and the social rituals they fostered. Coffee, with its invigorating properties, was the drink of intellectual discourse, of public debate, and of bustling commercial exchanges. Tea, often associated with gentility and refinement, became the staple of domestic hospitality and elegant social gatherings. Chocolate, a symbol of luxury and indulgence, remained a treat for special occasions or for those who could afford its rich pleasure. You can almost visualize a busy European port, ships arriving laden with sacks of coffee beans from the Ottoman Empire, chests of tea leaves from China, and blocks of cacao from the Americas. Each offered a unique sensory experience and fulfilled different social needs. This peaceful competition ultimately enriched global culture, providing people with a delightful array of choices for their daily rituals. And as you consider these rivalries, you realize how lucky we are today to have the option of enjoying all three, each for its own distinct charm. Despite the arrival of tea and chocolate and the occasional imperial ban, coffee's gentle grip on the Ottoman world never truly loosened. You're now reflecting on the enduring legacy of Ottoman coffee culture, a subtle but persistent influence that continues to shape how we experience coffee today, long after the empire itself faded into history. Imagine the subtle echoes of those 16th century kavahanes in your modern-day coffee shop. The concept of a dedicated public space for enjoying a brewed beverage, for conversation and contemplation, is a direct descendant of the Ottoman model. While the decor might be different, and the music perhaps more upbeat than a lone lute, the fundamental idea of gathering over a cup of coffee to socialize or work remains the same. You might even find a gentle humor in thinking that your local barista is, in a way, a distant cousin to the Kavasi Basi of the Sultan's court. Historians still argue about the precise degree of direct influence versus parallel development in European coffeehouse culture, but the Ottoman blueprint is undeniable. The method of preparation, too, carries a quiet legacy. The ultra-fine grind, the slow brewing in a seive, the emphasis on the rich foam, these are the hallmarks of what we now widely recognize as Turkish coffee. This particular style of preparation, perfected in the Ottoman Empire, is still cherished and consumed with devotion across the Middle East, North Africa, the Balkans, and beyond. You can almost smell the strong, aromatic steam rising from a freshly brewed cup, a scent that has wafted through kitchens and cafes for centuries. One quirky tidbit: The tradition of fortune-telling by reading the patterns left by coffee grounds at the bottom of the cup, known as taosleepy, originated in the Ottoman Empire. It's a delightful, if unscientific, way to extend the coffee experience, a bit like trying to find shapes in the clouds, but with a caffeinated twist. Even the vocabulary of coffee owes a debt to its Ottoman journey. The word coffee itself derives from the Arabic kawa, which passed into Turkish as kaf, and then into European languages. So, every time you order a coffee, you're unknowingly uttering a word that carries centuries of Ottoman history within its syllables. The social rituals associated with coffee also endure. The offering of coffee as a sign of hospitality, a gesture of welcome, is still deeply embedded in many cultures with historical ties to the Ottoman Empire. To refuse a cup of coffee in some places can still be seen as a grave insult. It's a powerful testament to how a simple drink can become a cornerstone of social interaction and politeness. As you sip your own coffee, whether it's a quick espresso or a slowly brewed filter, you're participating in a ritual that has been shaped and refined by centuries of history, much of it originating in the tranquil coffee houses of the Ottoman Empire. It's a calming thought, isn't it? To know that your familiar morning brew is connected to such a rich and enduring past. Our journey through the tranquil history of coffee in the Ottoman Empire is drawing to a close. You're back now in that dimly lit kavahane, the quiet hum of conversation a soothing backdrop, the gentle aroma of roasted coffee still lingering in the air. The tiny fincan is empty in your hand, the last drop of dark, invigorating liquid savored. It's time to quietly slip away from this centuries-old sanctuary. As you prepare to leave, take one last look around. Notice the subtle details, the worn patterns on the cushions, smoothed by countless patrons over generations, the flickering light of the oil lamps, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, the quiet movements of the kavasi, already preparing the next fresh batch for eager customers. This isn't a place of grand statements or epic battles, but a realm of quiet comfort and gentle connection. It's a space where time seemed to slow down, allowing for contemplation, conversation, and a peaceful escape from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. You gently place the fincan down, perhaps with a soft, almost inaudible clink. The rhythmic breathing of the patrons around you, the soft murmur of voices, the faint melody of a distant lute, it all blends into a gentle lullaby. The subtle warmth of the coffee, its quiet stimulation, is now fading, replaced by a profound sense of calm. This history, like the coffee itself, wasn't about sudden shocks or jarring awakenings, but about a gradual, soothing unraveling of fascinating facts. As you step back out into the cool night air, the sounds of Constantinople begin to fade behind you. The scent of coffee follows you for a moment, a comforting whisper of the story we've shared. The world outside the kavahane is still, the stars beginning to twinkle in the vast, inky sky. You carry with you the quiet understanding of how a humble being, discovered by goats and embraced by mystics, became a cornerstone of an empire's social life, and eventually, a global phenomenon. The gentle narrative of coffee's journey has prepared you for a quiet rest. Your mind is now filled not with worries, but with the subtle imagery of ancient traditions and soothing aromas. The sounds of the day are dimming, the light is softening. Let the whispers of history gently guide you now. Drift off to the quiet hum of 1,000 ancient coffee houses, where stories were shared and sleep was patiently awaited. Your journey through history is complete for tonight. Allow yourself to sink deeper into your bed, feeling the weight of your eyelids. The world can wait. All that matters now is the gentle embrace of sleep. You are safe, you are warm, and peace settles over you like a soft blanket. Let your thoughts wander, or let them disappear entirely. Just rest,